So, today I want really to be a conversation as much as possible, and I created a bunch of slides as I wasn't really sure where to kind of start, and really focused on kind of the foundation of creating a conversational chatbot. And I use the word conversational chatbot because chatbot's just today's new buzzword, but the reality is it's a conversation and leveraging machine and NLP and machine learning to have a conversation with an individual, and that's really the important part. So kick it off, and if you guys have any questions, please raise your hand and let's talk through it. If this is boring the hell out of you, just raise your hand and ask whatever question you want. I will not be offended. So just like a chatbot, I'm always learning, and I want to learn from you guys. So just a quick about me. I'm obviously not the guy with the weird hairdo, but I've been doing startups kind of my whole life, and most recent startup I was at was a company called WellTalk. We were in the healthcare space, and basically, I worked there for about 6 years, but for the last 3.5 years, I've been focused on creating a conversational experience, and we did that primarily because of our partnership with IBM Watson. So for better or worse, whatever you hear, we dealt with Watson from the early days. Right after One Jeopardy, we were one of the first companies in the consumer healthcare space to actually create a bot with the Watson technology. And so been working with all the fun and the pain points of it from day one. We've leveraged everything from the dialogue framework, the natural language classifiers, conversations. What we built with it was essentially first a wellness virtual agent, and something that could help you answer your wellness questions, fitness, nutrition, things like that. We quickly pivoted into being a virtual agent for benefits, mainly because no one understands their benefits and everyone has questions about their benefits, and quite honestly, no one really cared to talk about wellness and fitness. They cared more about their benefits because that's what cost them money. And it actually worked out well because that's also what costs health plans a ton of money, around $14 billion a year. So we focused on that. We built out a bot that had around 700 intents, 1,200 personalized responses. So we would personalize responses based off age, gender, plan type, and also coverage tier. Coverage tier is it just me and my wife, my wife, and my kids. So we were giving personalized answers based off that, mainly because we learned people wanted that. They wanted the personalized answers. When a guy asks, should I get a pap smear, just say no, not give you some stock answer. So we built that, launched it with a few big health plans, also with a few employer groups, and it's kind of the front line of customer support when you go onto their website. Outside of that, I've also played around with most of the bot building platforms that are out there, just trying to play around with them, get an understanding of what works, what doesn't, and have built bots that have lived on kind of the Facebook Messenger framework. Also prototyped some Alexa skills and played around with some Slack ones as well. So just more for fun and just to get a better understanding. So what we'll focus on today is really the foundation of building. And we're not going to necessarily get too technical, but if you guys would like to get more technical, feel free. I am not an amazing developer myself. My background is product, but I've gotten my hands dirty with all of this stuff. So I do have a fairly good understanding of it. I can talk at a high level. Sorry, when you start going down to the EC2 instances and security, that's out of my realm. So that's where we'll stay away from today. But really what we're going to focus on is the foundation of what it takes to build it. Focusing on the problem, how do you identify the problem, focusing on the medium, how do you determine the medium that you're going to choose, and then storyboarding, which is honestly the most important thing. What's the knowledge of it, and how do you prepare everything to select the right platform, and from there, how do you train your system appropriately? So it's really the foundation for all of that, because quite honestly, there was no foundation when we first started, and we went straight into building, and that was our biggest mistake. And we've rebuilt more times than you guys can imagine. We've, hit the limits for systems. And so what we found is this framework for kind of starting and planning out your bot will save you a lot of time and make your customers much happier. So we'll kick it off with why bots are so exciting. In case you guys haven't seen, bots are the new big thing, and the reason they're a new big thing is because of the fact that if you look at the average applications that users use on their phone, based off App.AI survey, we generally use about 30 apps a month. Out of that, we use about 5 to 9 a day, and as you can see, a large proportion of those are focused around social networking and communication. And so when it comes to that, you also see utilities and tools. Those are essentially the ones that are installed in your phone. That's Safari, Chrome. It's also things like phone and Messenger. So, a large portion is us conversing with others. And so, that to me is the exciting part is people want to converse. That is what they're using their phones for. That is what they're leveraging on a day-to-day basis. And it's why chatbots or even this conversational medium has become so sexy is, okay, well, how do we go where people are? And where they're comfortable? And that evolves, but as you can see, communication is always the central hub to how we interact. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see obviously top ones are all messaging applications or social networks, and hop to the next one as well. And this is the part that excites me is, and I love this image. We started off hunched over as like cavemen, like sketching things on the wall to communicate and grunting. And we've evolved to computers where we're now hunched over again. But it goes back to that point of the one thing constant out of all the technical evolution that we see is conversations. It's the communication, and if you can master that, you're golden for the future. It doesn't matter whether the next Facebook, the next Snapchat, whatever comes out. If you have mastered that communication with your customer and you understand it, that's powerful because that can translate to the next new big social network, new next messaging app, and that's personally why I get so excited. But if we kind of shift to the next one, you'll see people are also getting results right now. So there are real companies that are getting better engagements and conversions leveraging chatbots and that conversational medium. Sephora's saw an 11% increase in booking rates versus their mobile and web app. And it's because they were able to reduce the number of questions and things users had to interact with. Tommy Hilfiger went ahead and improved the browsing engagement 3.5 times and has an 87% return rate. Now, Chad and I were talking, that's great, these are all new mediums that have yet to be polluted with all the spam. That's probably true, and it'll probably happen where, okay, Facebook Messenger has become too spammy, just like our emails, just like possibly SMS, and it shifts to a new medium. But the thing that is constant, as I go back to, is communication, and the responses are still going to be very similar. So now if we shift into why they're so exciting, just how do you actually get it started? The first thing, if we switch to kind of the next one, is how to build kind of this chatbot. The reality is you're going to fall. It isn't that scary. You're going to fail a few times, and you're going to have to iterate like no other. This is still in its infancy, and it's quite embarrassing sometimes, but that's the great part about chatbots, and it's new. People are being much nicer about it right now than if you build a really crappy website and you don't give error messaging. So if we shift in, what I've done is, I kind of drew out this 7 steps for what I follow when I build out a chatbot and when I am going through the creation process. Like I said, I created this framework primarily because of the fact that we failed and we didn't do most of these in the beginning, and we saw the negative impact because of it. And so the number one thing, which is obviously most important, and quite honestly, this is product 101, what is the problem you're solving, and really identifying the why you're doing what you're doing and what. And being very crystal clear in that. What is that pain point? And is a chatbot even right for it? Chatbot is not right for everything. It should not be the solution for everything. I'm the first person to tell you that. It should not necessarily, give you a laundry list of locations that you could go to, and you now need to try to find and select through them. It doesn't work well for that. A web view is much better. So not everything should be in a conversational medium. Once you figured out kind of what that problem is and why they're having it, next thing I do is kind of look at who and where. And the who and where is really important because that determines the medium that you're going to build off of, Are these people coming to your website right now? Are they on Messenger? Are they on Snapchat? Are they on Slack? Where are they? That's what you're determining here when it comes to the who and where. And it's also helping you really start establishing, well, what's that personality going to be for that bot? And so, the who and where and understanding your target market is huge. The next thing would be the bot scope, the how. How is this solving that problem? And how is a conversational medium right for solving this problem? When you're looking at the where, you're also looking at the customer life cycle and the journey that they're on. And the bot, it might be one narrow part of that solution. The user might be going and trying to find health insurance, and really it's only there as a support system if they have any questions. Or maybe it's there if they start looking like they're bailing to kind of help bring them back in. It might be a small, narrow part, and that's what you need to figure out. It might not be the entire thing, because that might just be too complex for the user, and it might not be easier for them. So it's really important to make sure you understand where it fits, what that scope is, and not try to make it everything, and know where those lines are. From there, I kind of go into what's the personality of my bot. This is important because this is your brand. This is, what is the role of this bot in your application, in your bot, or in your product as a whole? Is it the whole product? Is it not? And is that personality right for the market and for what you're dealing with? And I'll talk more about this as I go through the slides, but I'm not going to go ahead and have a happy little cat answering your questions about cancer. That is just not right. So be very specific on what is your personality, and don't joke when you're not supposed to joke. Be serious when you're supposed to be serious, and understand what that needs to be. Once I have a good understanding of these 4 things, and I really don't start until I know those 4 things, that's when I go and try to storyboard it out. And storyboarding is really your taxonomy or your knowledge base of what your product knows and what it doesn't know. And what it doesn't know is just as important as what it does know. And we'll run through some of the things that I go through in the storyboarding, and run you through kind of the storyboarding, a little bit of the exercise I go through. Once you do that, build and train. Obviously, that's when you got to do the platform selection. There's over hundreds of platforms out there. And until you know those first kind of 4 things, you really shouldn't, and even the knowledge as well. Once you've done that storyboarding, that's when you really should have a good idea of what the platform's right for you. I've built many a times on certain platforms only to find out that there's a technical component that I can't get past with my bot. Great example, as much as I enjoy Microsoft Bot Framework, in there I can only use 5 entities. That is not enough for, let's say, an app on healthcare. So you just have to know the restraints. You have to know the medium and choose the right bot platform for what you are doing. Train your system, and test and iterate. So we'll go to the next slide where I'll delve a little bit deeper in problem identification. Don't run with a shade on your head. Be very clear in what you're doing. Understand it. Are you trying to be a customer support focused thing? Are you trying to help with website navigation? What are you really trying to do? Because the way your bot engages with the user is very different. You can be a customer support and you're kind of a knowledge base and answering everything. But in a website navigation, all you have to do is take the user to the right page and be their support to help guide them through it. Good place not burned down, right? I'll keep going. Should be good. Is it helping out from a product sales perspective, answering people's questions? Is it focused on engagement? All these things are really important. Really, when you're looking for, well, what am I building, and how do I leverage the platform, and what platform is right to go after? If I'm an engagement platform, I might want to use Messenger. Bless you. Because Messenger is a great place where I can still reach out to people. They don't feel too spammy, and they're more comfortable with it possibly. So I might choose that from an engagement perspective, but from a website navigation, I would never use a Messenger bot for that. It'd be stupid. So, really figure out your why, your what. And the biggest thing I can say is, what are your metrics to track against? And what's your baseline? Like I said, a chatbot is not for everything, and you should be comparing it to a metric you already have if you're already doing an existing app. If you're doing a new app, figure out what that metric is, and make sure you set a baseline and constantly see if you're improving it. because conversations can also add too many words, too many steps, and it's not always right. So, make sure that part is very clear. So next step, once you've identified the problem, is who's the target market. Like I said before, this is really being leveraged to understand kind of your persona, your personality, but also where are your users. This is an example of Facebook right here, where if I'm going ahead and I'm looking at a high net worth individual, and I'm looking for someone who is over 65, I'm probably not going to go for Facebook. That's just not the user base. But if I'm going for a general consumer, Facebook might be that. Same thing, Slack might be a nice medium if it's B2B and I'm dealing with small, medium-sized businesses. Maybe not the right one for a large business who might be using things like Teams. So really understand your customer, understand their the life cycle and where your problem is, because that's going to tell you what medium to build it off of. So the next thing, once target market solution, keep it simple and focused. Oh yeah, sorry.
Go back one slide.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing 1 and 2 in the first one?
1 and 2.
Steps
So
one.
looking at target market first and then the problem. I have, but it depends on, I think, the scenario. So I think looking at your target market and then pulling back into the problem can be valuable if you're trying to come up with kind of a new concept. But where I've seen it is if you have an existing product, a lot of the time you already have a clear idea of where the biggest problems are. And there it's just more understanding who is the typical person who has that. So I think it depends on the scenario, but that's just my personal perspective. Believe it or not, I don't. So, from the approach for, figuring out the scope, be very simple and focused in what you're doing. Don't try to do too much too soon. We all know Siri, and we all have been frustrated with Siri, and the reason is because it never was clear on what it knows. It pissed all of us off in the beginning, because we had no clue what it actually did. And I still don't know what it does well and what it doesn't. So, be very crisp in what you're doing, and here are a few good examples of companies that do a very good job, and be very clear of what they do. You've got XAI, which is magically schedule meetings. That's us. That's all we think about. They are just a scheduling company and your personal assistant for scheduling. And they've raised like $30 million just for scheduling. And there's a huge market there. And they know it because right now, personal assistant, but that can scale out to any market from there. Then you've got a company like Kit, just focused on helping small, medium-sized businesses really with their marketing. Small, medium-sized businesses struggle with all the activities they have, and they know that marketing is important, but they forget to do it. So it's kind of their little coach and assistant. And that was actually acquired by Shopify for that very reason. And they could easily expand into customer service or helping out from a sales perspective, but they just focus on that because that's the biggest problem their customers have from a small, medium-sized businesses. And then last, our lovely cat Poncho. Poncho is just a weather app. They're just focused on weather and horoscopes. They say and more. They really don't do that much more yet. But it's very narrowly focused at the start because there's so many areas you can go just from a weather perspective, and so many types of questions, variations, and things you're looking for. Should I wear a jacket today or not? Is it going to rain? Those are the types of things it's expanding out to. So really nail that before you kind of expand out. So once done that, personality comes in perfectly after that. As that you really are trying to decide, what's your bot's persona, your brand. And you have to think about the name, the image, the voice, the tone, the vocabulary. And it's very important because it needs to resonate with the problem, the target market, and what your solution is. The other thing you have to do is also keep it simple. I think it's just really the theme in general, which is if you try to make it too complex and you've got a little icon like 1-800-Flowers, you're never going to recognize that. You're not going to read it. Now, you can see companies that are newer and have been building just for bots, they've kept their brands very succinct, simple, and like I said, you want to make sure that personality really reflects what you're doing. You will not do something where you're joking around in healthcare. You won't do it. Same thing with X.AI, your personal assistant. You don't want to just kind of all of a sudden throw in some little off-humor joke and try to be funny and someone gets offended. So be very smart with the personality and make sure you define that personality before you go and start writing all your answers, because you're going to develop a relationship. That's the value of these conversations. You're developing a relationship with that consumer. It's why I think bots are much more powerful than a web app, is because it's a conversation. It's a listening, a talk back and forth, and thus, you need to have some sort of persona. You need to have some guidelines. This is like brand guidelines for a bot. This allows you to be consistent and also to scale your bot when you have new people come on board. So once you have all four of those first four steps, that's when you're going to start the fun part of storyboarding. And storyboarding is, what conversations people will have with your bot and what they can have. This is kind of the wireframing of the bot space. That's really what it is. It's figuring out what it knows and what it doesn't know. And the best rule to really adhere to is, what would a human do? People, yes, they know it's not a human, but they're talking to it. It's natural language because we expect it to interact in some way like a human. So think like a human. When you're planning out your storyboarding, your conversation flows, have real conversations. See what real conversations have actually occurred and interact with people and see where that conversation goes. Listen to it very closely and try to do it in the medium that you're actually going to interact with. Because chat over voice chat is very different than when we go ahead and talk online. Talk online, I'm going to use emojis or something like that. You have to actually account for those things. People love using them. So figure out what your bot does know, doesn't know. Understand the customer journey. As I say, where is this bot going to be appearing? Is this popping up on your site and there's context to what page it's popping up on? If that's the case, that's a different introduction than if they're coming to it and it's just on Facebook Messenger and using it, or they're using it on the home page. That's very different. So understand that mentality that user is in when they're going to interact with it, and make sure you're adapting to it as much as you can. You don't have to be super sophisticated to start, but be aware of that when storyboarding, because that could impact your responses. As I say, context is king, and it really is. Context is the most important thing. Do I know your age, your gender? Is that important when I'm giving you a response? And our example, or my past experience in healthcare, was really important. That was where we had to recognize between a male, female, age, and we also had to look at plan type, because all of those impacted the response. And if I gave you something that was just too much of a neutral response, they didn't have enough of a connection to it. They didn't really trust it. They want to go to customer support right away. So leverage your context, know what page they're on, know where they're coming from, know what information you have about the user, and be aware of that when you're going into your storyboarding. And I already said, practice the medium you'll be in. So here's an example of a very light storyboard. When we did this and when we had this at Well Talk, our storyboard probably could fit around both of these walls. It was about 700 different concepts. And we traditionally start off by doing sticky notes and doing it that way, and whiteboarding. But definitely recommend you take this into Visio or My Mapping Tool or OmniGraffle and keep track of it. And the reason you want to keep track of it is because if any new person comes in and they go, wait, what is this intent? Or what is this concept? Or what is this? This is a great tool to bring people up to speed, to say this is what it knows and this is what it doesn't know, for more new hires or bringing new people into the mix of building your bot. But this, like I said, is your wireframe. And what you see at the top is you see concepts. And below that, you see some of the responses if that concept comes up. So maybe someone's looking for the cost of something. So that might be the response we give for a cost answer. Then from there, you'll see below, sometimes it has buttons, sometimes I'm using carousels, sometimes I'm using help text. So it's really saying, well, what's that form of communication am I going to use when that pops up? And how am I going to possibly guide the user to maybe the next spot? The other thing this one doesn't show, but you need to really think through, is the flow. Is this a question and you just get a response like this one shows? Or is there a linkage for a flow from start to finish? So pizza ordering app, which every I don't know why every company loves to use it in the like chatbot space, but build a pizza ordering app. There you go ahead, you need to figure out what the crust, then you need to figure out toppings. That's a bit of a linear path then at that point that you need to follow, and that should be mapped out in this. It should show, where you need more context. If you don't have that context, what's the follow-up, and what's the relationship between these? So just things to really consider, and when doing this, make sure you're considering, your responses. That's one of the more important pieces of length, and making sure that it's succinct, or you're leveraging, the different tools to be able to keep your responses short. So that's a question.
Yeah, so this serves what purpose as far as moving things forward, informing the team? Is it internal to the core team? Does it get shared with shareholders internally or stakeholders internally? Does it get even some lightweight testing?
Yeah, so this serves multiple purposes. The first thing that it's serving is you're really understanding what are the concepts you need to train your system on. That's the first and foremost thing. Here are the concepts that we have to say. I'm using the word concept because it's a little bit more general, but what it really means is what are the intents that I need to train my system on, and where do I need to go ahead and get utterances to map to that. So that's one thing it does. So it helps your data science team understand, okay, well, here are the concepts we have. It also starts allowing you to see the conversation flows and figure out the responses that I have. So it might work really well for internal stakeholders on keeping them aligned of here are the responses, here's where we need to look at the context variables for age, gender, and where it might vary. Here's where it's an intent that might have 50 entities tied to it. So an example that I would use for that would be, when we were doing healthcare, it was what's the cost of a flu shot? Well, a flu shot was the entity. The true intent is cost. Well, we had, I think it was 100 different entities that we would leverage, and each one of those, when we would combine that up, would give a different response, but we had the same kind of core response template, if that makes sense. So we would say, it's going to cost blank, and then after you met your deductible of blank, it will do this. And we would just fill in those blanks with the variables for that specific entity. And if we didn't have an entity that matched, we would then have what we call a disambiguation flow coming off of that would say, sorry, I can't find that service because I understood that your intent is cost. Could you try to rephrase it? And if that failed, kind of come back. So it shows the conversation flow. It shows what concepts you're going to tackle. And it becomes a framework for internal, just to stay aligned. It becomes you don't want to give all of it away, but the higher level roll-ups become a very good sales tool for the organizations you're working with. Because one of our biggest challenges we had was making sure people were really well aligned on what our product knew and didn't know when they were buying our product. And we suffered with that at first because they were like, oh, it's a Siri for healthcare, it can tell everything. It's like, no, it can't. Here's what it knows, here's what it doesn't. And it allowed us to slowly expand it and show where we would expand it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Really the first one and the most important is kind of the intro and the I don't know. And the reason why the intro is the most important from my perspective is it also talks about the scope. It's really giving the user the perspective of this is what it knows. And it helps you start that conversation of, okay, well, now where are you going to go from there? It's giving the user, great insight into, okay, here's what I can help you out with. And the more you can lead a conversation with a chatbot, the better off you're going to be and the more successful you'll be. Because as soon as you let the user just ask anything like Siri, there's a very high chance they're going to go out of bounds or go out of bounds without a little bit of leading. So this is your kind of sheet on how to lead the consumer a little bit, give them, set those expectations and make sure that you're not having misaligned expectations. The I don't know is the complete opposite. It's kind of catching them when they've already gone out of bounds and bringing them back into bounds. So these are like the two most important, and ironically people leave these till like the very end most of the time, and it's tough to kind of wrangle yourself back. It's also a great spot because it's almost kind of like a categorical branching out, where you're kind of guiding the user down what you know. and leading them with some of the buttons, or leading them a little bit. And so it allows you to start thinking through, okay, well, what might be a category that a user is going to ask about? Oh, and then are they going to go deeper than that and ask about a specific brand, and then ask about a specific product? And so it almost really helps you build out that taxonomy and build out the relationships, amongst your taxonomy. And then help, obviously, that's a common one people ask, so another good one to kind of bring people back into focus. After I do the core flows, I then kind of go to the primary flows. And your primary flows are really dependent on what your product is. And so in terms of those, like I say, think through what your product is, have conversations with real users, look at your past history if you have the historical data, and see where they're going. And see where it turns in from okay, they got to this concept and now you can guide, tell a story, and lead them and educate them, and just kind of follow that flow. So I do the primary flows, and then once I'm done the primary flows, there's flows you don't ever want to forget. I think so, yeah. And these are ones that almost everyone does end up forgetting. And they're some of the most popular ones because you get so narrowly focused on what your topic area is. So like for us, it was healthcare and benefits, that we didn't even think about the fact that people are going to go ahead and say, okay, or thanks, or question mark, or yes, no. And if you're not taking those into consideration, your bot's going to sound really stupid when it goes, sorry, I didn't understand that, this is what I know. So be very aware of that and understand in your flow of a conversation when that's relevant and when it's not. Because sometimes you will have to say, sorry, can you, help me understand a little bit more? Because they just put the question mark, like, what's your concern? The other thing which isn't actually on here is they do have emoticons, are pretty popular, as I mentioned. So if you do a Facebook Messenger bot or any consumer SMS bot, definitely be aware of those and make sure they map to your training of intents for some of the reactions, because reactions are big. When we launched our bot with WellTalk, we would have a lot of people be like, this is not what I'm looking for. Oh, that was awesome. Oh, thanks. And we just failed. And it was actually, sometimes it was a compliment, and other times it was like, no, you were wrong. And so those are not only great to just train on, because you now get to see how often you're right and wrong, and you have that actually categorized from your analytics perspective, but now you can actually handle those reactions, be smart, and be personable, so it's a real conversation. And then there's a few others like bye, always capture bad words. People will curse at your thing pretty often. And the other thing that they also like to know is, and this goes to the personality, who are you? Who created you? They'll ask the meaning of life. My favorite was they asked, where are my car keys? And I thought, like, that was the most absurd one. But they're like, where are my car keys? And we got it so many times that we actually did train on it, because who would have thought that people want to know where their car keys are? So, yes, stay in scope, but understand that people will always go out of scope. And, as your taxonomy grows, you can definitely grow it as well and adapt to your customers, because they're going to challenge you. They will test you. They'll ask you for jokes, all of that. And these are all kind of the, don't forget the reactions, don't forget the common casual responses, but also don't forget that these are real people, and in many circumstances, they're going to use OMG or little abbreviations and emoticons. So cater to your customer. So then we get into the more complex flows, and a good example of this is leveraging pronouns.
Actually, just on the previous slide, is there technology available which, if we could plug in for all the conversations having with the real agents, that it could learn some of these situations or some of these oddball questions?
So it definitely could. You're saying with like a live agent.
Yeah, I mean,
that it's learning based off the live agent interaction.
Live agent, and then you update some of it which you want to, and leave the rest of it based on.
So a great way to gather your training data is to look at that, and a great way to look at the storyboarding is to look at that actual data. And what's interesting though, as soon as you don't tell someone, as soon as you let someone know that they're talking to a machine and not a human, they naturally want to test it. So there's still things you are not going to get, even if you look at historical data. And it's absolutely fascinating. When the user does not know, they're much more like precise, they don't offend people, all that. As soon as you tell them they're talking to a machine, they're going to offend the hell out of it. They're going to say ridiculous things because that's who we are. We like to push limits. So yes, that's honestly the best way to do it. I recommend the more you have historical data, the better to leverage it. And it's going to give you the most accurate from a training perspective, but also use the context of where that historical data came from. So when we were looking at it in healthcare, when this data would come, we had to take in the context that most of the data we had was from emails when we were able to get data. And emails are a different medium than a kind of live chat conversation. And so we actually had to parse out different bits of the conversation to leverage the training data, because people like to throw tons of questions and statements into one paragraph. And there is not a chatbot out there, although Bixby claims it will do this, that can handle multiple intents at the same time. Watson's starting to allow you to handle it, but I've yet to see any bot that can handle compound questions really well. Most are very good at these simplistic questions right now, and as soon as you go to a compound question, these things they shit the bed. So it's tough. We're still, like I say, at its infancy, and being able to parse that out and then parse together an appropriate response when the user has a compound question, it's just something that I have yet to see a good example of. Okay. So, when I get to the complex flows, these are ones that I feel make the bot more personable, and this is why I like to bring these up. These are not necessary if you're trying to just do a proof of concept and see, is this working or not? You don't need to, add these in there. These are just, in my mind, nice to have, and from historical data I've seen, people will utilize these, and your system will fail occasionally. So pronouns is a great example. We saw about 3-4% of users were actually leveraging pronouns in their questions because people want to have a conversation. We as humans, we might say, how much does a flu shot cost? And the next thing I want to know is, where do I get it done? We do not want to talk like we're talking to a search engine, which is, where do I get my flu shot done? That gets really annoying and piss everyone off. So pronoun recognition is something that I definitely recommend looking at, and it's managing the context and the state of the conversation and storing it in the state of the conversation. And I love that one, which is what do we want? Chatbots. When do we want them? Sorry, I didn't understand the request. And that's honestly what happens in a lot of these cases, and where dealing with pronoun recognition can kind of help you out. Same thing with confidence-based responses. This one I actually see as one of the more important ones to make your bot not just sound super rigid. This is understanding when a user asks a question and says, I went to my doctor yesterday and he told me I needed this and yada, 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 and I want to understand how much a flu shot costs. And really they're looking for flu shot costs. Well, that could come back as an intent of cost, but confidence is fairly low because of all the other gibberish that came with it. So, if let's say the confidence is medium, at that point you could go ahead and say, well, were you looking for the cost of a flu shot? If it came back with two intents that were both medium confidence, you'd want to say, did you mean cost of flu shot or information on your flu shot? And allow the user to disambiguate. And that's where it's powerful, the power of conversation. If you're not sure, we as humans naturally disambiguate. We talk through it, and a lot of time we even talk and both sides don't understand it. It's hilarious. I was dealing with that on my car ride with my aunt and my brother in Tahoe. I'm listening to the conversation, these two, they're talking, they think they understand each other, and they're both on two different pages. And so, we as humans will keep on going. And so we need to understand, when do I need to disambiguate and when do I not? And so leverage the confidence that comes back from an intent classification to be able to run through a certain flow. Make your bot seem like it actually understands you, and it's not just, and make sure you use that context to make sure that it is aware and seems like it's understanding what you're saying. If I went ahead and said, could you just please rephrase, it shows that I don't really even have an idea of where it was going, even though I know cost was an intent that was medium confidence. The low confidence is another one that I like to use, which is, you can't train your system perfectly the first time, the 10th time, the 100th time. You're gonna miss utterances, synonyms, and certain entities that people are using and the phrasings they're gonna use. And so, instead of saying, sorry, I don't know the first time, they wanna, have a second chance. So try to guide the user to rephrase, and then if they go ahead and get another low confidence, well then go ahead and say, sorry, I don't know, and guide them back. But be intelligent with that conversation. Allow the person to try again, instead of just hitting a fail sequence every time. And with these, use variations in your responses, so it doesn't seem like you're just talking to a static bot. It's amazing just variations, how much of an impact that can make on user satisfaction. And then the last part is, just be aware of the context and the state that you're in on your conversation. You might have a deep flow where a person's ordering pizza and they want to get out of it. Let them out of it. There are many scenarios where I've seen where it's like, enter your zip code. And someone says, I don't want to, I'm done with this. And it's like, enter your zip code. That's not a proper zip code. Don't be stupid. Realize where it is in the conversation and let them out, because that is the worst. And realize that, just like a web form, if someone puts in the wrong data, you need to give them feedback on that. You need to give them a response that's appropriate. This is no different. It is just a conversational meeting. So be aware of, if that conversation goes down that kind of linear path and is a little bit more structured, be aware of where they are. And if they go out of it, try to store that context in case they come back, because they don't want to start from the beginning. So this is very important when you get to kind of the deeper conversation you're going to have with your user. And as your chatbot evolves, the more you can store this context, the better, because then you can make your system seem smarter and smarter. Just be cautious on how you use it, like any data you have. You want to seem like the creepy guy who knows everything about you. So be smart. Okay, so that's pretty much the first 5 steps right there that I really use before I even go ahead and get to the point of selecting a platform and training. So before I go any further onto kind of the build and train, any questions?
Yeah, quick question.
Yeah.
Do you think it makes sense, or are there any signs of standardization of being able to define these flows? Kind of right now for each environment, you probably have to try to storyboard the flow once and then go implement it each time, right? Do you think in the future it might make sense to have some kind of generic format that you could have for the flow that might feed into different environments like API.AI or Lex or whatever?
Yeah, so there's nothing that I'm aware of right now that does it. I know at WellTalk, we basically build it so that our content management system actually produced that taxonomy.
Okay.
And so that was the way we handled it, but we had to build that ourselves. And that's the problem that I have with most of the systems out there right now. They're not really built to handle a large scale application off the bat.
Right.
They're really built for these small bot use cases and for you to manage all your content in there, which isn't scalable. It's not, it's not something you can scale from one client to another. And that's the reason we actually end up extracting out our CMS from the actual dialogue flows themselves, because the dialogue flows, they were standardized, but the responses were different for every client. And so that's about the best we did, but you're correct. There's nothing out there right now, and I think the reason there's nothing out there is because they're still very much at the beginning trying to just get the standard bots to work, and they're not at the point where they're managing massive knowledge bases. But I'd be shocked if Google Assistant or others, they didn't have a good platform to do a lot of this. They're just hiding it from us for right now. So,
in that same interest, is there, I refer to it as a UI pattern or a pattern library? Somewhat similar, does that exist for bots?
So there are many UI patterns or libraries that you can leverage, but they're very dependent on the actual UI layer that you're interacting with and the messaging layer. So are you interacting with Facebook Messenger, Slack? Are you dealing your own kind of homemade bot and it's just being on a web app? And so each of those is a little bit different from the interaction models that you can leverage. And so, if you use a system like Chatfuel, it will give you all the things you can do for Facebook Messenger. And it's actually a great kind of way to build out a bot very quickly if you're building for Messenger. If you're building for Slack, there are platforms that are specifically tailored towards that. And then there are also applications out there that are good for kind of prototyping some of these as well, but they're very specific to the UI kind of messaging layer. Does that answer it or not exactly?
Well, kind of. I was hoping for a more like central resource. Sounds like it's just really fractured still.
It is, and there are a lot of similarities, but it is really fragmented. Now, you're seeing a lot of companies start to align. So at first, Slack didn't allow you to use buttons. They didn't even have button integration. But they saw a big uptick in how well it was being leveraged elsewhere in Facebook Messenger, and they brought buttons into the mix. You're seeing across the web now, you've got carousels that are starting to become more and more popular, but you don't have that in Slack quite yet. So, it's still quite fragmented, but they're starting to get a lot more centralized on the different tools you can use and like the different tools in your tool belt from a UI perspective. But it is still quite fragmented. Like my favorite tool to use is the best way to break up a very long post is to actually just break it up into small chat bubbles, but to actually use the ... that loading to allow the time for that individual to read it. And time it based off what you think is actually going to be the average time it would take that individual to read that. And that works really well for a live interaction. It works horribly when you go ahead and you do this in Facebook Messenger and you're just trying to do an engagement and the user's not interacting with it in real time. So, there's these various models that you can use, but you have to be very aware of what your bot's doing and when your users are interacting with it. And not all platforms yet have all of them. So we're still early on and seeing a little bit of improvement across. Okay, so next part we'll hop into is selecting a platform and training. With this, I think I actually switched up the slides to focus first on the training, and the only reason was, how many of you have actually trained classifier or model or are aware of how that works? Okay, so a few. So I just want to make sure everyone was aligned first on just how it works and how training does work. So if we go to the next slide, most systems are set up in this way. Some aren't this complex, some are this complex, and some are even more complex. But essentially what you're doing is you're training what now is kind of being called utterances, which are the way you would phrase the questions to specific intents. So in this example here, what is the weather in Seattle today? I'm looking to find the weather in Seattle on Friday. These are both, you're just trying to get the weather and find the weather out. Now, that's great because that's your intent, but there's a lot of context or things you need to, attributes or variables you need to pull out of that to really still be able to give the user the right answer. And those variables are generally called entities, or sometimes it's called slots. And in that case, you're trying to pull out here that there are two entities or slots. One being Seattle, the other one being today. Because in this case, Seattle is important because I need to know that's the location, and that would be a location entity. Today, that's a time entity, and at that point, I need to understand what date you're looking for. So in the utterances above, I would probably be training this not only on these utterances, but I'd also be training that Friday is the time, and I'd also be training that Seattle in both cases is the location. So when you're going and you're doing that training, you're really kind of setting up those utterances, setting up your entity types, and a lot of these systems do have them built in now, but this is important to know because each system handles this differently. And some systems are really great in that you can be a little bit fuzzy with misspellings for a entity. Others know it has to be exact string match. So Conversations, for example, by IBM, if I misspelled Seattle and I didn't have that as one of my examples, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't even pick it up. And but if I use API.AI, it's probably going to capture that. So be very aware that these things are important to figure out in your kind of taxonomy in your model on, are you going to even, do you need to even leverage entities or not? And based off of your needs, it might determine what platform you're going to use from an NLP perspective. So, once I kind of, after this, so if we go to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That looks right. Okay. So this is how I go about kind of training the bots. I also kind of follow just a little process here, which is, I first determine the intents and entities. And I do that based off the taxonomy that I just created. And those use cases give me, that layout. Sometimes I'm collapsing conversation flows because you're realizing that it is a similar intent. And you're probably not going to get this all right the first time, so don't worry about it. You'll see when you're getting conflicts on intents coming up too closely and when you need to probably collapse them and when you sometimes need to separate them out. So just be aware you're not going to get it right all the first time. But if you have that taxonomy, you have the foundation to make sure you do this pretty well. Once I have that, now comes to mapping the utterances to the intents and also identifying to the entities. Now this is where, if you have the real data, this is the best thing in the world. And where you can go ahead and get a ton of these utterances is search Reddit, search these forums where people can go ahead and ask these types of questions and see how they're phrasing them. It's a great public source to pull a lot of this. And you're going to have to be creative if that data is not there. Like for us, we didn't know what are common terms that people use for healthcare terms. There are tons of clinical terms, but no consumer goes ahead and talks in clinical terms. They're talking in real use terms. So what we did was we went ahead and found WebMD. We knew all of the clinical terms that we had, and we crawled their website, looked at the metadata tags for SEO, and we took those and then placed them in the question forms we had. Because that allowed us to know, look, they already did the SEO work. They already found out what consumers call these medical terms. Let's go ahead and use that as a base. So you're probably going to have to be a little creative in this if you don't already have the data. But generally the data is available somewhere, or you can kind of hack it together. From there, you're going to go ahead and set up the kind of entities and synonyms. You first set up your entity types. And so entity type might be like a clinical service. And then from there, you'll set up flu shot. And then you want to set up all of the synonyms associated with that. So influenza, influenza vaccine, flu vaccine, so on and so forth. So you're going to have to do a lot of training on that. And that's the example where we were actually, we were filling out the entities based off the data that we had pulled. Once you have kind of all that set, you're really ready to kind of train your system. And from there, it's really about just testing it. And what I recommend is, if you can, and you have the technical skills, build the ability to test flows right away and put your kind of standard flows in there. The other thing I do recommend that we would do is we would actually keep out 30% of our intents and our training questions out of our training set. And we do that deliberately to use those to test, to see how well our model is performing. And so that would allow us to see, look, we didn't train on everything, but is it understanding some of the variances in the question forms? Now, we only did that with the utterances. We didn't take 30% out of the entities. You want to keep all the entities in there. Just, not much machine learning that always occurs in a lot of the entity extraction right now, but you want to definitely do that in the utterances. Then, test your system, and like I said, if you can have the ability to run an automated test, that's going to be your best friend and your first step, because as soon as you change your model round 2, you want to make sure all those core flows that are your primary things you want your users to be able to deal with, you want to make sure they work. So if you can automate it, and that will be your best friend. Depending on how that did, you either will deploy or go back and iterate. And the biggest thing is just learn. If you deploy it, you're going to always be learning new stuff. And what I would recommend is have an analytics system built in or some way that captures all of those low confidence and medium confidence questions. Also start looking from an analytics standpoint of when people are saying, no, that's wrong, or any kind of negative keyword, because that's generally how you know if you're right or wrong. People, we put thumbs up and thumbs down on there, and that was clicked by like 11% of people. The way we knew that we were correct was, one of a few things. They would either say thanks or something positive, and we'd close the conversation, have a closing loop, or they'd say, no, that's wrong, or they repeat the question. So there are certain patterns you can capture that are going to give you the analytics you're looking for and help you then retrain your system. And when you're doing your testing, make sure you don't only do just automated testing, send it out to friends, send it out to real users, because that's where you're going to learn the best. If you can send it to a small pilot group, that's even better before you launch to kind of a full out suite. Okay, so last part here, or any questions on that? Yep.
You did mention analytics, so I'm assuming that something like GTM or Adobe DTM will not work for this. Or is that like, how does that work?
So yeah, most analytics programs don't work for chatbots. Now they'll tell you how long the user was on the site. They'll tell you, a unique user or is it a recurring user. So you do get some information from your traditional analytics suite, but really, most of the analytics is actually either built into the platform, or there are companies that do it as well. But I'm going to be completely honest that even the ones that do it they give you a lot of engagement and interaction metrics. They're not giving you great metrics on when you're failing, when you're not failing, when you're doing well, and accuracy rates. So a lot of these things you do have to build in-house, and generally you'll build it into your analytics program that you're using. But yeah, it's still very rough, and you're having to kind of do it, most of it you're having to do yourself.
Have you looked at Chatbase? I think Google just released their analytics tool for chatbots. It was maybe a month ago or 2 months ago?
I actually haven't, so I will need to check on that and see, if that has improved it at all. But, what I've seen, and you see it from like Dash.io, Body Analytics, and even just all the built-in ones, most of them aren't looking at kind of queuing up what are the things some do, queue up the things that, okay, you missed. But a lot of them aren't looking at, let's say, the confidence or the negative keywords, and even just sequences where people just fail and bail off when traditionally they go all the way through. And so those are the things that I still feel like you might need to build yourself. But this world is changing very quickly, so I might be completely wrong. I hope I am. Okay.
Just a question about the NLP part. Do these platforms allow you to use your own domain data? Because NLP is, you understand everything, and potentially meaning you understand nothing.
Yeah. So
ideally, you use your own.
Most of these, almost all of those all the ones that are mentioned there, you do use your own data. And they do have some things that come out of the box, such as recognition of certain entities like times, dates, and sometimes phone numbers. But most of them, from an intent purpose, you're having to use your own data. And a lot of them are still kind of working to improve that. So, yeah, it's a mix. These are not like, more traditional NLP systems that are just pulling out, here's your noun and the core subject and things like that. Most of these ones are the platform for you to kind of build your chatbot off of for your own purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Got it. So yeah, so when I'm selecting a platform, these are kind of the 6 areas I'm looking at, in terms of what they offer and what they don't. A lot of platforms offer like 3, 4 of these. Some offer just 1. And so you're going to really have to figure out what is right for you and what your technical skill set is to build out the application that's right for you. First one, obviously, UI messaging layer. Second one, the NLP engine. Third is dialogue flow conversation manager. So those are when you're doing kind of the more linear, trying to capture context. That's where you're generally building that in your conversation manager, your dialogue flow manager. Business logic and broadcast. Most of the time you're building that. The business logic. Most of the time you're building your own application. Whether it's a node-based app or whatever it may be. You're generally having to build that out yourself. There are very few platforms that offer it. I think Pullstring does give you the ability to kind of build it in, but most of them that are out there, you're having to build it yourself. BotKit, I think, doesn't, even Microsoft Bot Framework. But if you're looking at like Watson Conversations or a Chatfuel or one of those, API.AI, you're really going to have to build a wrapper around those NLP engines and some of the other dialogue flow conversation managers. Broadcasting, this is really important if you're building an like an app that's focused on engagement and getting people re-engaged with your content in that medium. There are very few of them that actually do build this into the platform. I think the only two that I've seen that really focus on it are Pullstring and Chatfuel, and they're obviously really targeting the Facebook Messenger side of the world for that. And the broadcast is for you to ping a user based off a certain schedule, time, or whatever logic it may be. CMS and API integration, generally you're doing this on your own. Most, like we talked about, most have the CMS built in. It's just not pretty for any person to really manage it. And most of these actually are not great at more than one person managing it at a time. And so you have to be very careful about that, which is if you have a team of 4 people who are trying to manage the content, you're probably going to delete some of the stuff. So you got to check with the platform and see how it interacts with multiple people on there at the same time. But most don't do a great job with it. And then analytics, we talked about analytics as well. So what to look at when selecting it. If you go to the next slide, like I said, there's 100 of these platforms. And so I can only kind of give some words of wisdom, but if you do need any advice, feel free to email me, afterwards and say, look, this is what I'm trying to build, and I can try to steer you in the right direction. But generally what I'm looking at when it comes to the platform that I'm building off of, most important is where do I want this to go? If I want this to be on, I want this to be my website, I can't use Chatfuel. That's just for Facebook, Messenger, and Telegram. If I want this to be, SMS, I gotta choose a platform that can handle SMS out of the bat, or I have to build that integration with Twilio myself. Speed of development and team technical ability is probably the most important thing when it comes to choosing the platform. If your team is tech savvy and they're great, you can go ahead and build your own NLP system, and you can, build your own models and run with it. You can build your own CMS and do all of that. If you're looking for something really quick and easy and you don't need to be technical at all and you want to just prove out a concept, build one in Chatfuel. I built a fully fledged operational bot that had at least 200 responses in 2 weeks with Chatfuel with no development effort at all. So it really depends on what you're trying to build and how technical your team is and how quickly you want to test it out. Now, Chatfuel, like I said, you're stuck with Facebook Messenger, but if you're just proving out a concept, it might be a great way to do it. Complexity of the problem you're solving. This one's actually really important. It's probably the stickiest one, which is most of these systems don't actually tell you what their upper limit is. So if you're building a really complex system that has thousands of intents, there's generally a limit of how many questions or utterances you can tie to it. So we hit this with IBM in the early days, where we were using natural language classifiers and they only allowed 15,000 question forms. Well, when you have 700 intents, you have to be very selective then on what question forms you use. We had 90,000 questions. Didn't work for us. So, we had to make sacrifices. So, look at how many intents you have, how many utterances are mapped to that, how many entities you need to leverage. There are ways you can work around these things and these limitations, but it just adds a little bit more work on your development team. And if you don't have a big budget or you don't have a great development team, you probably want to choose a different platform. Same thing, complexity of conversation flows. You could go build off of a BotKit or one of these SDKs that are a little bit more friendly towards developers. But if you're having very complex conversation flows, and the people who are primarily editing those are not tech people, you probably don't want to use that one because they don't have the greatest UIs on there. There are other applications like Conversations, Pullstring is another great one that if you're not tech savvy, it works very well for you. So be very conscious of who's editing what and what you're building, and that's probably going to help steer you in which one you want to use. Like I said, we built a lot of tools because our people who were using it were benefit managers. We built our entire CMS. We built so many tools just for them because when they went in the other tools, they broke our entire flow, and our system and our entire app would go down. And then last part, security and stability. Obviously, that is a big one. If you are building something that needs 100% uptime, good luck. There are very few of these systems that actually stay up all the time. So definitely protect yourself if that's the case. The other thing to note is, when it comes to stability, you get what you pay for. And there's a lot of these that are free. And you don't, I launched my bot and it was down, and it went on product time, it was down for the first whole day. I was sitting there in Messenger, responding to people manually, apologizing, trying to respond to their questions. It was a great learning experience because I saw how they interacted, but it sucked because I had nothing I could do. I wasn't paying for the services built on Chatfuel. So, question?
Yeah, for, in your experience, is there a practical reason behind limiting the number of events or entities in some of these platforms? Is it because the model can't handle it, or you're just trying to limit the number of resources? What's going on there?
Yeah, so a lot of the time the reason they're limited is the speed to actually build the model. So, when we ran models back at the natural language classifier days for IBM, each model would take 4 hours to build at minimum. And so, that was the reason. There were also hardware reasons that they claimed is why they couldn't, expand it out, is that, they didn't have hardware that could handle it. And I don't think they also at the time really had a good way of splitting up, across multiple processors at that time to do it. So I think a large reason they're doing it is, speed. I think another reason they're doing it is cost from their business standpoint. And there are very few companies that do push the limits on that many questions. So, yeah, last part that I do mention is security. So that's another very important one. If you are HIPAA compliant or you are dealing with concerns about, the data, you need to be conscious of this. You can go use a great service like API.AI, but Google has all your data. So just know they have all your data, and they're probably using it to train Google Assistant. So, that's why a lot of people end up using, Microsoft Luis. They'll use Watson because that data is not being shared with anyone else. It's just yours, and that's all. And they do take into consideration the HIPAA compliance and all that. So, just be aware of that. The other thing is these websites right here, they're not really websites. One's GitHub repository. This is fantastic for showing you a list of applications and tools that are broken out by NLP engines, bot platforms, tools you can use for the UI elements. So this one is fantastic in terms of giving great resources. This one is bot building services. This is really a Google spreadsheet that is just showing you what UI messaging layer each of these platforms works for. Does it work for Telegram? Does it work for Slack? All those. So another great resource right here. And then I've started to create one because these two just didn't really meet my needs that well. That is kind of a combination of both of these and goes in a little bit more of, for example, pull string. You can bring in your own, API.AI. They use their internal API layer, for the NLP piece, you can bring in API.AI, Luis, you can use their internal one, and none of these other two really described which allow you to do that, which don't, which have the CMS piece built in, which doesn't, which has the conversational flow piece built in as well. So, yep, I think that's all. Yeah. Any other questions? And if not, my email is right there, and if you guys need any help or any guidance, let me know. Yep.
So you mentioned about some of the limitations in terms of scalability and stability. Do these, or some of these companies offer paid, where you get better stability, better scalability, maybe higher limits?
Oh yes, the companies you can think that generally would love to charge you more for those services do. So Microsoft, IBM, and they are happy to do it. And it costs you quite a bit. You go from paying per API call on some of these to actually paying for dedicated servers. And so it's just, it can bump your cost up significantly at that point.
pretty clear leader in the framework space, API.AI, Lex, Microsoft Cloud Framework. Any of those stand out as like something to bet on?
I mean, I love API.AI. They're my favorite when it comes to the NLP side and entity extraction. I think they do the best job. And I think it's reflective because if you look at Google Assistant, that's who they're using. That's why they acquired them. And they're probably the smartest and most intelligent virtual assistant out there. So that's one that I love the most. The downside is, they don't offer that SLA or anything like that. So if you're dealing with a company and it's a healthcare company, at that point your options are a little bit more limited to a Watson or a Microsoft, and there it really depends on what your limitations are from an entity perspective and how much you're willing to build around their system. So it's a really bad answer, I'm sorry, but
That's fine.
yeah, it's really how much you're willing to build around their system.
So API.AI sounds like the most capable, but they're not committing to any sort of content.
Correct, and that's the one that I've had the best success with.
When you say build around their system, you mean customize their system?
Pretty much. So like with IBM, you might go ahead and leverage conversations for figuring out intents, but you're going to go purchase or use some other tool for an entity extraction, and then your service itself is going to bring this all together, map it to the CMS, and go there. So it really depends how much you want to use their system fully and how much you want to build around it. So, yep.
One of the things you mentioned is in terms of you ran into some of these limitations or you had to switch platforms, how easy it was or painful it was to switch from Watson to API.AI? Or how would you, any tips on that?
Yeah, so in the world that I was in, we were partnered with IBM, so we stayed with IBM and worked with all the fun that came with it. So we didn't have to change, but we did have to change through their own platform evolutions and deprecating things, and that by itself was painful. The reality is these things have become less painful from the training models themselves because you can export to a CSV, import with CSV, it's pretty much the same. It's really when it comes to doing entity extraction, sometimes you have to do that through an annotation service. That can be a little bit more painful, as well as really the conversation flows and really adjusting your service layer that kind of pulls it all together. That's where the most pain has occurred. But if you build out your application layer in an abstract way, you can mitigate the pain. But there's with switching with anything, there's pain. So awesome.
Well, thank you. No, well, maybe one more round of applause for Ben here. We appreciate him coming out today and just a wonderful lesson for all of his insights into the chatbot world here. I appreciate all of you guys for coming out. Definitely hang around for another 30 minutes, get some pizza, get some drinks, and definitely pick Ben's brain while he's here. Cool. Thanks, guys. It was, I'm glad that
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, if you want to email me, I can send it over. Definitely share. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's good when it doesn't have to be complex to start. We try to do way more than we should have. We don't. But it's more simple. Awesome. Thank you so much.
I need to leave to catch up us, but I really appreciate it.
Hopefully you got some value.
Thanks for offering.